Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of the PWIFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Dobbs, and this podcast is all about learning how to live a life full of living amidst any and all circumstances by playing where your feet are, doing your best and being your best no matter what, no matter where. Today we're joined by Jacob 1020 Thompson, and y'all, it's a fun episode. Jacob is an inspirational communicator, he's a recording artist, he's an author, and so much more. And his story is quite inspirational. In fact, this episode he talks a lot about how a devastating diagnosis directs him to his destiny. So by listening to this episode, I can guarantee you're going to learn how to push past with perseverance and pursue your purpose by playing where your feet are. Before we hop into the episode and the fabulous conversation, I want to remind you to please follow and subscribe here on YouTube to the podcast. We want to make sure you're staying up to date here and with all things PWIFA. So hit us up on all the socials as well so you don't miss a thing when it comes to the podcast, the book, speaking engagements, and so much more. Merchandise, oh my goodness, I'm wearing it. Merchandise and so much more, y'all. It's all on our socials. We keep everything up to date by posting on there. So you want to make sure you are following us. But y'all, I'm so excited for you to listen to this conversation with JT. It is so good. He's so good. And the contents are so good. Let's get into it with JT. This is season 1, episode 10. This is the PWIFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. And I'm your host, Cameron Dobbs. Alrighty, Jacob, JT, 1020 Thompson, what is up?
How's it going? I'm happy to be here. Super excited.
I am so excited to have you on the podcast. I'm so happy we connected in the first place and just have learned more about each other's stories. You have such an incredible story that is full of just power, and I am so excited for you to share it on the podcast today. Now, I want to start off though, because we introduced your name here. You are Jacob Thompson, Jacob 1020 Thompson. So just for clarity, tell us what in the world is the 1020? We got to know. What does 1020 mean? Why is that in your name?
That is a great question. And actually, it's kind of a goal of mine that people would ask. So I don't make it super obvious or clear for everyone. 1020, first of all, spelled TEN20. All one word. It's a combination of two things. So my initials are JT. Most people call me JT. Those are the 10th and 20th letters in the alphabet. But more importantly, Matthew 10:20 says, "For it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you." That really is my goal in everything I do, speaking, writing, poetry, music. It all comes back to that verse. So that is 1020.
And I feel like that's such a good moment to start off this podcast because you're already just prophesying over us that God is going to speak through us. And you already mentioned just a little bit of the, I wouldn't even say hobbies, but the skills that you have of music, of spoken word, of writing, of so much more. So I hope you guys are excited. We're literally like 10 seconds into the podcast and I'm already pumped for what's to come. So I'm going to give you the floor. I want you to share your story. I know you have an incredible story. Like I said, it is very powerful and you got some good words to share with us today. So without further ado, take it away. Talk to us. What is your testimony? What is your story? What brought you on the podcast today?
Yeah, so I think a good place to start is my dad and my grandpa. They were Division I athletes at the University of Nebraska. When I was like 5 years old, my dad put a pull-up bar in our basement, and he said we had to do pull-ups, push-ups, and sit-ups before we watched TV. So sometimes we would ignore him, but sometimes we actually did it. And to this day, I'm thankful for that because that put a certain work ethic and mentality into me. So that kind of began my journey in sports, and that's where I found success and identity. When I was 11 years old, my baseball coach, after the championship game, I was given the game ball, and my baseball coach pulled me aside and said, I truly believe you could be a pro baseball player someday. And I don't know, I was 11. Maybe he knew what he was talking about or not, but I took that to heart, and over those years really built this identity in athletics. All my friends, my purpose, how I evaluated myself was built upon how I performed. So in 8th grade, I joined football, and from my first day of football, it was like baseball was kind of my first love, but when I put the football pads on, it was like I found who I was. I found this thing that I loved. And I remember scoring my first touchdown, just feeling like a feeling that you really can't describe. And it sticks with you for sure. And so football really became my thing. And I went to this high school that was like a football high school. The whole town came to the games. It was packed out. We were good. So my first day of high school, I sit down in my gym class. We all get a Post-it note, and the teacher says, write how you want to be remembered. And I wrote down, I want to be remembered as a football star. That was like my whole goal in life. I looked up to the seniors, and I knew that's what I would become. And in high school, basically, it all started changing in my mid years, and like sophomore and junior year, it was like everyone got better, everyone got faster, and I didn't. And my senior year, at the beginning of every year, we would, run 40-yard dash and do all our max lifts. And all of a sudden, I was weaker than I've been the last couple of years, and I was slower. And I couldn't perform well enough. And I found myself on the bench. And that was a real moment of identity crisis. It was like all my best friends, they're all starting, they're in the newspaper, and I'm just watching from the sidelines. And I really struggled in that time, wondering like, who am I and what is my purpose? And where do I belong if I'm not a star athlete? During that whole time, I had became involved in Young Life. So Young Life is a youth organization that is all about helping kids grow in their faith. And I had said no over and over to this invitation to Young Life, but I finally accepted and started just going every week and loving it and hearing about Jesus in a way that actually made sense and was relevant to my life. And I had kind of, on one hand, my identity was crashing down, but on the other hand, I was studying the Bible and I was learning and growing my faith. And that all culminated at the end of my senior year, I went on a backpacking trip, and it was with my Young Life group, and we got to be out in nature and read the Bible and talk about it. And for the first time, I really opened up about like things I had struggled with and about my identity, and just put it all out there. And I'll never forget, it's like a weight lifted off of me, and it was like what I know now to be God's spirit like washed through my body. And it was this, I was crying, and which is pretty rare for an 18-year-old football player guy. But yeah, it was like I encountered God, and I felt for the first time like God loved me. God forgave me of all my sins, and he had this purpose and a plan for me. So I went to college, and I was determined to follow Christ, to read my Bible, to pray, and to build relationships with like-minded people. And that was my focus. So for the first time, I don't have a sport to play. I don't have a team to be on. And I have to figure out like, who am I without this? And pretty quick, I got into leading ministry. I got into coaching, and I found out that I had this gift of spoken word poetry, that I had never done anything artistic ever. So I knew like it was God. And the first time I ever wrote a spoken word, it was like God like gave me the words to write, and it was a really powerful experience writing it and performing it. So spent all my time in college, what I say, building a foundation. In the Bible, Jesus says, whoever hears my words and puts them into practice is like a wise man that built his house on a firm foundation. And when the storm came, the house could endure. So I spent all this time trying to follow Christ. And in that, I built a foundation, and little did I know the storm was coming in my life. I would have these moments where so I went out to skate, and I played hockey for my whole life. All of a sudden, I couldn't skate. Like literally, I couldn't. It was like, yeah, it was this unreal thing, and everyone was kind of like, why can't you skate? And I didn't know. And those experiences kept happening, and eventually that led me to go see a doctor and try and figure out what was happening. And over several months, I ended up being diagnosed with the rare disease called Friedreich's ataxia, or FA. I found out I'd had this my whole life, been born with it, and it has slowly been taking away my physical abilities for my whole life. My balance, coordination, energy production, speech. So that's why I talk slow. Which is funny side note, people would meet me and they'd be like, oh, when I met you, I thought you were like a stoner beach boy surfer, like. And I would, for the longest time, I just thought, well, that's weird, but now I know that's why. So yeah, I got diagnosed with this disease. I was 24. I felt like I had my whole life ahead of me. I just have been married 2 years, bought a house, had a great job coaching football and doing Young Life. And on one hand, it was good to have a diagnosis and understand what had been happening in my body. Because what happened was I lost a lot of confidence in myself and in my abilities, and believe lies about myself and my competence and my ability because I couldn't perform athletically. Um, Now I knew why. I mean, it made sense. Um, Not that you should put your identity into that, but it was more so I had something I worked so hard for that didn't work out, and I felt like I had failed. Um, so on one hand, being diagnosed helped me to understand my life. On the other hand, I was told this will only get worse. There is no treatment. You're going to be in a wheelchair. You're going to lose a lot of your ability to speak. That was really, really hard. If you can imagine, it was like one day I felt like I had my whole life ahead of me, and the next day I felt like my future was over. Like all my best days were in the past. Um, and again, I struggled and wondered like, what is the meaning of my life now? Um, so definitely dealt with depression, feeling hopeless, just kind of for a while everything is kind of a blur, but just months of going through the motions and feeling like um I had no real hope for the future. And eventually I had to have a shift in my perspective. And shout out my guy Inky Johnson. I hope to meet him someday. But I saw this video by him, and he essentially was, 8 games away from being drafted to the NFL after working his whole life. He went to make a routine tackle and he almost died. They saved his life, but his arm was paralyzed. Football was over. And in this video, he talked about, he said, when life hits you with adversity, a lot of people say, why me? But he said, why not me? This is the perfect opportunity for me to show what it means to have character, what it means to have perseverance and resilience. And I saw that video and my perspective just changed and flipped. And, it made me realize like, this is an opportunity. I've been saying for 6 years that, I believe in Jesus and I believe I have this purpose and that I have this eternal paradise to look forward to. And now I have a real trial in my life, and it's time to show, do I actually believe everything I've been saying? So I stopped looking at my situation as an obstacle and stopped looking at things I may not be able to do in the future, and started seeing my situation as an opportunity, and started thinking about how can I make the most of what I can do right now. So my speaking, my spoken word, my music, which I didn't even say how I got into. But through that all, I started doing Christian hip hop, and everything I did became geared towards more about my story and my situation dealing with FA. And man, since then there have been just some really cool opportunities to speak at like an international rare disease day conference, and they asked me to come share my story. And my story is woven with the good news of Jesus. And where else, how else could you be invited to a medical conference and get to speak about Jesus? So play where your feet are, which we'll get into more, but it's like God has a purpose for us that is bigger than just our circumstance and just what's in front of us. And so if he is going to use my situation, then it's all about me surrendering to what he has for me. And just after a lot of cool things happening, I wanted to put my story into a book that would encourage people, that would inspire people, and that would share Jesus with people. Yeah, so I did that. And man, it was quite a journey of writing a book. You know, I had a period where I just stopped writing and said my story is not that great and I'm not gonna write this book. And it was amazing to see. It was like God brought people in my journey at different points to encourage me or to help me, or just whatever I needed, it came at the right time. And so now my book has been out for a couple months. All my family has bought it and just have been able to share it with a lot of people and have got really good feedback. Had some more speaking opportunities. So, it's like even though it can be difficult, it's like God knows what he's doing. And if we can give it all to him, he has a plan for us. And it is better than whatever we had planned. That's for sure. So that's in a nutshell. I'm sure you have some questions and ways to move us. So
Of course. Well, how incredible. First off, your story is again so powerful, and you articulate it so well, and I am one of those people who have given you great feedback on your book because I did have the honor of reading it. I was telling JT before this, I actually failed a little bit and I read all but 2 chapters. I have 2 chapters left in the book, but I can tell everyone listening that all of the chapters I've read so far are absolutely incredible, and I could hear some of the stories that you were telling just now in your old testimony that are also appearing in the book, and just remembering how you went into those in more detail and with more information. So if you guys want to hear even more, I'll go ahead and plug it now. Look up his book. It is so good. It's called From Diagnosis to Destiny, and it's so incredible. It says your trials aren't meant to break you, they're meant to make you. And now, reflecting off of some of the things you had just said, when you were talking about Inky, I was thinking of actually a story that I did on my brother as a journalist. So my brother was a collegiate football player who was looking to get drafted and going to play pro. And that whole time period, that season of his life, hit when he first got the flu on pro day. And then things happened. He got a couple of tryouts. And then the next year he went to try out again. And then COVID happened. And so he had a lot of crazy chaos coming in his life as well. And so I did a story on it to describe everything. And one of the quotes he had said was, when life hits, you just got to hit harder. And that's what I was thinking when you were going through your story, and when you mentioned Inkies too, that, you know, life can hit you and we can be that house that's built on the sand, and we can just be hit and fall down and break down, and that's it. Or we can get hit. We can put our identity rooted in Christ. We can put our life rooted in Christ, and we can hit back harder. We can keep pursuing. And one of the quotes you have in your book, and really one of the stories you go into further detail about this, is talking about don't put a period where God wants to put a comma. And you're talking about the power of a comma in your life. That you also said how your condition is not your conclusion. I love that, because as someone myself with post-concussive syndrome, you know, I often think, you know, I have to modify my screen time. I have to modify how much I can work on things, but it doesn't mean I don't have to work on them. So I think you're such a great example in that too, because you mentioned yourself, your speech is one thing that can be affected by FA, but look at you. You do spoken word, you do speaking engagements, you're on a podcast right now. Like, you wrote a book, like your speech may be quote unquote affected, which really it's not bad at all. But you're using it nonetheless. And so you're not putting a period, you're putting a comma, you're letting God continue to work through you. And I think there's just so much power to that. So I'm going to let you speak on that, because this is your words that I'm just shouting out here. But talk a little about that whole concept of putting a comma instead of a period, and how your condition is not your conclusion.
Yeah, I think if you ever just set a goal, almost immediately, it's pretty much guaranteed there'll be some adversity that will come your way. And in some cases, it's bigger than others. But the point is, you can always adapt. You can always pivot. And I was thinking actually about play where your feet are. And again, we can get into it more, but it's like your feet, they may not be where you thought they would be, or where you think they should be, or where you want them to be. But if they're anywhere, you still have a purpose. You still have a choice. You still have an option to adapt, adjust, and to keep pursuing, keep going forward. Like, you know, the funny thing is, when I realized I wasn't going to be like a pro athlete, but I was doing music, I wanted to be the next Lecrae. You know, I was like, that was kind of my career plan, was like, I'm going to blow up as a Christian rapper, and, you know, Lecrae is going to sign me. And that's the game plan. But then with FA, it was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be your typical rapper that's going around doing crazy shows and dance moves and rapping super fast. But what I always go back to is like, what can I do right now? I can still write. I can still speak. I can still do poetry and music. It's just different than what I may have had envisioned. One of my favorite examples of this, I actually found out there's a grant available for people who have FA to get a tricycle. So if you've ever seen, it's a recumbent trike where people are kind of laying down. It's got two wheels in the front and a big wheel in the back. I found out I could apply for this grant, so I did, and I won the grant. And then I got to choose my model. They have different models. So I chose obviously the speed model.
Obviously, without
Yeah.
question.
But it was like, now I have something that I can do, and I like something active where I can do it and not be controlled by FA. So I could sit around and be like, oh, I can't play football anymore. I can't play baseball. Can't play basketball. My family is big in tennis. I can't play. I mean, I sort of still play doubles. My brother is really good. So if I have him on my team, we could still win.
There you go.
But yeah, I could sit around and complain about everything I can't do, or like I could get on my trike and do that. Um, and I don't say that to like minimize what people are going through, because it is hard. It is really a bummer when all my friends go out to play basketball and I can't play. So I'm not trying to minimize that or say it's not difficult, but still there's a perspective that you can have where that's not the end, that's not the period, it's a comma. The period would be, oh, I can't play, I'm not going to do anything. The comma says I can't do this, but I can still do that. And low key, I'm researching the Paralympics and trying to figure out, like, I found out recently they have a classification for people that have conditions like me and like FA. So I mean, we'll see. I'm like, maybe my athletic journey had a comma and not a period, but we'll see where it goes. No promises.
Oh, that's so, first off, that is so cool. Oh my goodness. And also just so, so good. Everything you just spoke on, it's incredible. And I think so much it's when we're talking, oh, I'm going through this, I have this adversity I'm facing, but God. It's that comma and then the but God part. That's the power to it. Yes, we may be facing trials. In fact, Jesus literally told his disciples that we would face trials. So it's technically something we shouldn't even be surprised about. But God, yes, we're going to face these hard times. Yes, we're going to struggle, but God. Yes, you have FA, but God, he's still using you. He might be using you more than you ever even imagined because of this condition you now have, because of this diagnosis. Like you said, your book title, From Diagnosis to Destiny. And I think that God is just using your story and using your platform so much, maybe even more, because you have this special story on your life. And one thing too, you mentioned, of course, bringing in play where your feet are, which I love, is so much about this is being self-aware in the moment that you're in. And it's that choice aspect. It's choosing the life you want to live. It's choosing a life full of living. It's choosing to, maybe, yes, you're going through hard times. Maybe you're in the season of waiting, but you're also seizing the day. You're not letting anything stopping you. Yes, you're going through this struggle. Yes, you're going through an identity crisis, or you lost what you thought was your identity, but now you're seeing that your identity can and should be rooted in Christ. And that's where it's really at. You're choosing to put your identity in Christ on a daily basis, and you're choosing to seek God, to seek joy, and to share the light of Christ. And so much about play where your feet are is that self-awareness. It's that daily choice that you have to make. And I think even, you've learned so much about yourself and your story and your passions and your identity. But I'm sure for you, because it's the same for me, that I still have to wake up every single day and choose joy. I still have to wake up every single day and think consciously to put my identity in Christ and not put my identity in this jersey behind me that I have from the University of Miami, because first and foremost, you know, I had this jersey and I only played in it for 2 years when I thought I'd be playing in it full time for 4 years, then going to play pro. But I had to hang up this jersey. And so I learned myself that my identity is not rooted in my performance on the court, in the classroom, or in my career, that my identity is rooted in Christ. And I have to remind myself of that every single day, because it's something we have to choose. And it's part of that self-awareness, like I said. So any reflection on that, just on, you talk so much in your book about it as well, of just choosing that life full of living and not letting things stop you. I think I have a quote. Here we go. Page 61. If you guys have a book or want to check it out, you say it's talking about the concept and culture of finding yourselves. And especially when you're going off to college and it's all about finding yourself. And so you say on page 61 that and you're mentioning another story you're talking about, but you say that we don't actually find ourselves, rather we create ourselves. The decisions we make, relationships we form, activities we get involved in, habits we develop, and so on are all part of our formation. And then you say a little later down the page, don't wait around to become the man or woman you want to be. Do it today. You never know what day will be your last. Do it today. Don't wait around. It's that choice to be active in your faith and in your life. So JT, talk to us about that.
Yes, I have two kind of main thoughts about it. So one being, one of my best friends, he passed away when he was 22 out of nowhere. He actually was a national champion speed skater when he was younger, but through sports, he had a lot of concussions and he developed epilepsy. Then he went to college and got a neuroscience degree. And his whole goal was to help people with epilepsy or other neurological issues. He called me the day after he graduated. He said, I'm going to be home like tomorrow, and then we should play basketball. And we made this plan. The next day, I got a call from a different friend saying that he had passed away. And I share that because that's part of why I always think about any day could be your last day. Like, what are you doing today with that in mind? How would you live differently if you knew today is going to be your last day? Like, if I ever have a conflict with somebody or, whatever it is, I think about like, what if today were my last day? I would want to reconcile with that person. I would want to be living right with God. Like, so I think about that a lot, and I have a sense of urgency to do what God has for me in this life, because you never know. And the other thing about choosing, I had COVID, so I'm gonna spoil a little bit of your next couple chapters because I write about it in the book. But I had COVID and my symptoms hadn't fully hit yet the night before, and I woke up the next day and I'm like a major sweet tooth, and I try and be like healthy and then have a sweet, I try and balance it.
You got to treat yourself some. Yeah.
Yeah. So on this particular day, we had these cinnamon rolls that I love, and I was like so excited to eat it, and I bit into it and nothing. Couldn't taste it at all. And it was super disappointing. And as the world now knows, like when you have COVID, you can lose taste, smell. But as the week went on, I found out there were benefits to not being able to taste and smell. Like, I can eat all this spinach without having to taste it.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about who's in the bathroom before me or changing my son's diaper because I can't smell. Um, so what hit me though is I realized, like, then I thought about it, like, oh, would it be better to live with no smell and taste? But then I thought about everything I love to taste and smell and all the amazing smells and tastes that life brings. And I said basically I would always choose smell and taste over not. What I think happens is people choose to live metaphorically in that COVID symptomatic state. If you never get your hopes up, if you never really love or you never really pursue something, then you can't be hurt or you can't experience failure. And people unfortunately choose to live below their potential and their purpose because there's a feeling of safety. But if you really love somebody, you could be hurt. If you really get your hopes up, you could be disappointed. If you set a goal, you may fail, but the in the same way of like the tastes and the smells, the what we get in life when we give it our all is worth the risk. And my encouragement to people is don't live in that COVID mentality, because there may be some benefits, but you're really missing out on life to the fullest when you really just invest yourself and give. And it's funny because this is true in a spiritual sense too. All right, Jesus says in the Bible, if you try and save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life for me, you'll find it. And it's counterintuitive, but it's so true.
Yeah, that's so good. And something I actually just looked up my church notes from yesterday because it reminded me of something you just pointed out, how, we're not meant to live an average life. Like, we're meant to have these big dreams and big goals, and we're not meant to, keep our focus on that fear of failure. We're supposed to go for it. And I go to Passion City Church here in Atlanta, and Pastor Louis Giglio was talking yesterday just on a message about seeking first and seeking God. But he had this little moment in it where he was talking about just 2022 for everyone and New Year's resolutions and different things, and how we should be, we all want to be successful. Of course we want to be successful. So he asked the church, like, oh, like, raise your hand if you want to be successful in 2022. And really no one actually raised their hands. And he was like, oh, we're just a super humble church that like doesn't care. And that kind of fired him up actually. And he went off and he said, we don't want to be an average church because we're not an average kingdom, because God is not an average king. Like, we are made in the image of God, of the God of the universe that created us, that formed us, that knit us together, that knew us before we were born, like that set plans for us, that sent his son to die on the cross, and so much more. Like, we are children of God, made in the image of God, So we're not meant to be average in any shape or form at all. And so I think I love that point you just bring up about not living with that fear of failure, not living of that fear of what might not come out of us chasing our dreams or going after our goals. And that's, again, going back to play where your feet are. I mean, that's a little bit about what it's about from that beginning. You have another quote in your book on page 98, and this is a quote I've heard before as well. And I love that you put it in there though. And it says, you don't have to be great to get started, but you do have to get started to become great. And so it's just that, again, self-awareness of being like, all right here where my feet are right now, I have this resources, I have this much money, I have this amount of skill, I have this amount of education, I have this amount of whatever it might be. Yeah, maybe it's not a lot. Maybe my platform is only 20 followers. Maybe it's 20 million. But it doesn't matter. You just have to start. And that's so incredible. And I love how you talk about that. You just have to start. And we're not meant to live an average life. We're meant to have that taste. We're meant to have that smell. And whether it means sometimes we get a bad smell and sometimes we get a bad taste, it's so worth the good things that come out of it. I love how you went over that. That's so good. And a couple of things too, as we continue to wrap up. Another thing you touched on, just going back to the whole concept of choice. I'm so big on rejoicing and choosing joy. And that's one of my favorite people in the Bible. And one of my favorite authors in the Bible is Paul. And he talks in Philippians 4. I actually was just at a speaking event a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned this verse, and I was thinking about it today in preparation for the podcast. But Paul, the context of this verse is that he's in prison. He is in prison. He is in chains. He is under arrest. But he says this verse, Philippians 4:4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Like, this doesn't sound like something someone would be saying as they're sitting in prison, right? Like, that does not sound right at all. Like, he is in prison, probably in the worst situation of his life. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier of your condition not being your conclusion. Because no, like, Paul didn't have a diagnosis. It wasn't a medical condition, but it was his circumstance. It was the condition he was facing in life. But that wasn't his conclusion, because he continued writing Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, like all these books, all these letters that ended up in the Bible that we know and love and repeat to each other while he was in prison. He didn't let his condition that he was facing stop him. It wasn't his conclusion. He put the comma where other people wanted to put the period, and he continued fulfilling God's purpose for his life. And so I think, your story so much relates to Paul's story of just, no matter what comes your way, it doesn't matter what condition you may be in or what condition is put on your life, or maybe what limits other people try to put on your life. I'm sure you've had doctors tell you a lot of things that aren't so positive, but God. And but you, like, you are continuing to choose a life full of living no matter what. And you, like you said earlier, you're focusing what you can do, not what you can do. Again, when life hits, you got to hit harder, and you are certainly hitting back.
Amen. As Christians, we know our conclusion. If I believe where I'm headed is a place with no sickness, no pain, no death, no tears, then I can have joy knowing that. And regardless, that's the crazy thing, is like, Paul didn't know if he's going to get out, or he may die in there. And I had somebody, like, it's really hard not to notice negative criticisms, as you may know. Like, it's 1,000 people could say great job, and one person could say, and it's like, someone said to me, like, kind of discouraged me in my book, saying, like, you're giving people false hope because they know someone with FA who has a worse physical case than me. And I thought about it and I was like, I'm not giving anyone false hope because A, the hope is Jesus, and that's not false hope. And B, I'm not saying that I have hope because God is, has led me into certain speaking engagements or writing a book or any of that. I'm saying my hope is, even if I do end up in a wheelchair, even if I do die younger, even if all the worst things come, that is not the conclusion. And that's the hope. That's what the book is telling you. It's not saying, oh, yeah, I have a difficult thing, but God's using it, so it's fine. It's saying I have a difficult situation, but I have a home in heaven to look forward to.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love how it brings that full circle a moment on that, using a comma and all of that, because we know how the sentence ends. That's your point. We know how the sentence ends. So you can't end it for us. Like you can't tell us what's going to happen because we already know. So don't even try. Like, we know God's got this. Yes, we don't know what's going to happen between the start of the sentence and the end of the sentence, but we know that the end ends on a positive note, and it ends on us in heaven. It ends in Jesus being the victor forever and ever. Amen. And so God is in control of that. And we know that we can root our identities and our situations and our lives and our circumstances, knowing that he's got this and he's certainly in control. Well, JT, I want to ask you the question I ask everyone. And after reflecting on everything today, just thinking about your story, and we've mentioned it already about how Play Where Your Feet Are certainly reflects, or certainly blanking on my words here, how Play Where Your Feet Are goes hand in hand with your story. There we go. Tell me, what does Play Where Your Feet Are mean to you?
To me, it means always pressing on, always moving forward, always never just giving up and never letting some adversity write your narrative. Always adapting, always adjusting, and always having somewhere you're going and something you're pursuing, but that something is bigger than yourself. And I say this, I wrote a blog post about it, but when my dream was to be like a pro athlete, it was all about me. It was all about how good I can do, and how many people could like me and how much money I could make. But now, like, I have a much bigger dream of impacting people eternally and helping them find their purpose and their identity. And if I help one person with that, that's a way bigger dream than playing in the NFL or whatever. So playing where your feet are, no matter where they are, is having that dream that God has given you and pursuing it no matter what.
I love that. So it kind of changes your whole perspective on that teacher asking you how you want to be remembered by, huh?
Yes.
No longer just being remembered by as that varsity football player or that athlete. It's so much more. And I love how you mentioned the impact of even just impacting one soul, one life. That's worth way much more than an athletic career could ever be, even if it was professional, even if it was Olympics. You're actually changing the kingdom. You're not just setting records or breaking records there. So good. Well, JT, go ahead.
Well, lastly, none of those things are bad either. Playing your sport, giving it your all, being successful, that's all good, but it's not the ultimate, it's not your ultimate identity and not your ultimate purpose. And it's all about how could you use that for God's purpose. So go do your best and win all the gold medals and do it all, but remember what really matters.
Yeah, amen. Remember who's it for? And I think, I literally have this jersey right behind me, so I'm reminded of it a lot, even just in this call, looking at it in my reflection, that, volleyball is something that I absolutely love with my entire heart. And I love the University of Miami, maybe even more than that, because it's impacted me in such a great way. But I constantly remind myself, volleyball, whether it's me playing on the court or me coaching, it's just something I do. It's not who I am. It's just something I do. It's just something I love to do, but it's certainly not who I am. So again, just reminding everyone listening that your identity is not rooted in your performance on the court or in the classroom or in your career, or you fill in the blank, whatever it might be that you so often see yourself as, oh my goodness, if I do this, I will be great. And if I don't, then I won't. That's not true. Again, the God of the universe created you. He formed you. He knit you together. He knew you. He set you apart. He set plans for you, and he sent his son to die on the cross for you. And so and that was all before you achieved anything. Like, I don't think any of us were here when Jesus was on this earth. I don't think any of us are that old. I think I can say that with like a 99.9% truth to it. And so I think we just have to realize that God loved us literally before we ever existed, and before we achieved anything, and before we even set those goals, before we even said, oh, I want to be that varsity football player, or oh, I want to be that Olympic volleyball player, or whatever it might be. God chose us before we chose our dreams, before we chose our goals, or before we accomplished anything. So our identity certainly does not lie in there, but the way he can use it is incredible. And the way he can use your sport, use your platform, use the people you meet through it all, that's the incredible part. And that's just letting God work. It's letting God use our stories and use our testimonies, just like you're doing. So I'm sure everyone listening, JT, is so excited just to further connect with you. And so I want to ask you one last question before we get into the little logistic side of things over here. Technically 2 more questions, but we'll do this question first. Anyway, a lot of people are seeing you and seeing your life and learning from you, I'm sure. I mean, I'm certainly learning from you. So I'm sure it's the same with them. I hope everyone's been taking notes, writing down things, because it's all this good stuff and gold nuggets. So just continuing to encourage people to play where their feet are, just like you're doing in your daily life. What is a piece of encouragement you have for them as maybe they're facing these adversities, facing these struggles, or facing no struggle at all, but just want to continue playing where their feet are and being intentional?
I would just say, make the most of every day, every moment, and every resource. Like you mentioned, like, you don't have to have 1 million followers. You may have 100 followers, but if you're not serving your 100 followers, what would you be doing with 1 million followers? So don't focus. A big thing, and I put this in my book too. We all know about David and Goliath, but David had previously defeated lions and bears with nobody watching. And that's why he knew he was ready for Goliath. So my encouragement to people is, don't start with Goliath. Start with the lion and the bear, where no one's watching. And that's where you build a foundation. Your time with God in prayer, your time practicing your craft, what you do when no one's watching, that's what really it's ultimately about.
That's so good. I've never heard of that application, besides of course in the book as well. But I've never heard of that application and just that perspective of how you look at that story. So I think that's incredible. And I think too, I'm even thinking, if you're thinking about your followers in like a literal sense of, oh, I can't post this yet, or I can't, start sharing my story now because I only have 20 followers. I only have 200. I only have 2,000. I gotta wait till I get like 2 million, and then I'll be able to share my story, right? Because no one's gonna listen to it when I just have 20. Like, what? That, I gotta wait till I get bigger. But I think that's so cool how you mentioned just care for those that are following you too. And I've heard it before in another similar way of just celebrate the people that are in the room. Celebrate the people that are in the room. Maybe you're at your first speaking event and you have 10 people there. Tell that story to those 10 people, share that with them, share that love of Christ, share that light that you're shining that God has given you, because maybe it's going to impact all 10 of them. Maybe it's going to impact one, but either way, it's making an impact. And that's the important part. And you're fulfilling your purpose and God is using you. So whether you got 10 people or 10 million, serve those people, care for those people, and celebrate the people in the room and serve the people in the room too. So, so good. All right. Now my final question before we get into the nitty gritty. We can't end this podcast without actually hearing something from you after you go on this podcast and talk about how you are an artist, how you do spoken word. So I got to ask you, JT, can we have a little sample of something, a little bit of spoken word here?
Yes, you can have part 3 of a 3-part piece. So you'll have to go find the other parts.
The tease, I love it.
I know God has a purpose. If it wasn't for my trials, I never would have written these verses. And if everything in my life was perfect, then I would have no reason to worship. Because you don't know what healing is till you've had a broken heart. And light shines brighter when you come out of the dark. And all my pain just made my spirit unbreakable. And all my doubts just made my faith unshakable. See, my story is something only God could write. I wouldn't know my purpose if I never had to fight this fight. And there's a reason I've endured all those sleepless nights, so I could tell you that everything is going to be all right. Because heaven is my home and earth is only temporary. So you don't have to cry when you lay me in that cemetery. And I can say that truthfully because I'll know I stood for something on the day they read my eulogy. One of God's soldiers, you could bet I'm on the roster, and no weapon formed against me shall prosper. So I'll press on, whatever storm I may weather, because for those who love God, all things work together.
So good. Oh my goodness. All the snaps. We got Mike dropping. That was so good. Oh my goodness. So you guys heard him. That's only one part.
Thank you for snapping, because people that know spoken word know that you snap. If you clap, you don't know. That was good.
Fun fact, I was actually in poetry club in high school. So
okay.
I'm all for the spoken word for sure. I'm all for the snaps. But that was incredible. And like you said, that's only one part of it. So if you want to hear more about, or if you want to hear the full piece, go check it out. Remind me, what was the name of that piece again?
That piece is called Metamorphosis.
Metamorphosis. So y'all can go look it up. And also, you have bits and pieces of it in his book, From Diagnosis to Destiny. So check out his book, check out his spoken word. And JT, where can they follow you? Where can they learn more about you?
Yes, I am most active on Facebook and Instagram at 1020 words. So TEN20 words. And then 1020words.com is kind of a catch-all. That's my website. So go on there, shoot me an email, shoot me a DM. I would love to connect with anybody. And my book, merch, whatever it is all on my website. And then wherever you do music, Spotify, 1020 TEN20. I have some new music coming soon, and I mean, I think it's the best stuff I made by far. So yeah, new music, always doing new things. So connect with me out there and let's be in touch.
Amazing. And we'll make sure that we link everything below in the podcast description. And depending on when the music comes out, if it's already out by the time this podcast is released, we'll also make sure that we include that linked below. But make sure you guys follow JT on all of his platforms. Check out his website, and of course, check out his book as well. Again, as someone who has read almost all of it, all but 2 chapters of it, I can promise you guys it's a great read, and he's able to go more into his story, even more than this podcast can give you. So y'all check it out and learn more about JT, because he is incredible and he's doing great things. And I am certainly glad that I connected with you, and I'm so excited just to see what continues to come out of God using your story. So JT, I'll give the floor to you. Any last words, comments before we close it out?
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And anybody who hears this, play where your feet are.
I love it. That's the perfect way to end the episode. He said it best. Play where your feet are, guys. Don't forget it. JT, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And who knows, maybe we'll have you on again. Cool. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. Again, I'm your host, Cameron Dobbs, and we so enjoyed having Jacob 1020 Thompson on with us today. A reminder, anything he might have mentioned, whether it's music or books or his own social media, is all linked in the description below, so you guys can stay caught up with JT. And while you're doing it, stay caught up with all things PWIFA. We have our socials linked below too, so you can, again, not ever miss a thing when it comes to PWIFA. And I know you guys are watching here on YouTube, but just a reminder that we are also streaming on all podcasting platforms. So whether it is Apple or Spotify or Google, whatever it might be, you can find the podcast on those platforms as well. But till next time, be blessed and play where your feet are.